evening after Gordon's breakdown, the Fat Controller came to speak to the other engines in the shed. "Gordon has had to go to the workshops at Crewe to be mended," he said. "Henry, you will take over Gordon's duties pulling the express." "But sir," Henry asked, "what about my jobs?" "I have arranged to borrow another engine from the other railway. His name is Patrick, and he'll be here tomorrow morning." The engines were a bit uneasy. They knew that the only engines on the other railway now were diesel locomotives, and they all remembered what had happened the last time a diesel had come to their yard. The next morning, a diesel came along the line into the yard. He stopped next to where Duck was shunting some freight cars. "Hello," he said pleasantly. "You must be Duck." Duck smiled. This newcomer seemed like a pleasant fellow. "That's right," he said. "You must be Patrick." "Yes," Patrick replied. "I believe your controller said you had a train for me to take." "There you are in the siding," Duck replied. "Just turn around on the turntable and you'll be good to go." Patrick quickly ran over to the turntable, then came over to the siding and backed down onto his freight train. He glanced over at the freight cars that Duck had just finished switching. "Are those for me too?" he asked. "No," Duck replied. "They're a slow goods train for Donald and Douglas terminating in Elsbridge." "That's on the way, I can take it for them," Patrick replied. Duck looked doubtful, but Patrick assured him that he could handle it. Patrick's driver arranged it with the yardmaster, then he backed down onto Donald and Douglas's train. With a cheerful toot of his horn, he pulled out of the siding, leaving a very worried Duck behind. Patrick was soon running nicely along the main line. He tooted a friendly "hello" to James as the two trains passed on the viaduct. Back at the yard, Donald and Douglas arrived to take their trucks. They found Duck taking on water and looking very worried. Donald, who was in front, glanced over at the siding where their trucks should have been. "Were we supposed to be taking some trucks, Duck?" "Patrick's taking them," Duck replied. Now Donald and Douglas looked worried. "For Lord's sake," Donald replied. "We can barely get it up Gordon's Hill ourselves. He's not going to be able to handle it." With that, the two Scottish twins puffed away to find Patrick. Duck hoped they'd be all right. Patrick had run into trouble on Gordon's Hill. He hadn't been able to pull all the freight cars himself, and now he was stuck. "We shouldn't have taken those extra freight cars, Patrick," his driver said. Patrick could only agree. He could hear the chuffing of an approaching steam engine in the distance, and he hoped that they would be able to help him. Donald and Douglas were coming along Patrick's line. Couldn't see the train blocking the tracks at the bottom of the hill. Douglas experienced a horrifying moment of deja vu just before he and Donald slammed into the brake van. The Scottish twins only just stayed on the rails. No one had been hurt, but the damage had been done. Donald's front end was a mangled mess, as was the rear of the brake van. A whistle sounded out from up ahead. Henry was approaching from the other direction with the express. A horrified look crossed his face as he saw the accident, and he slowed to a halt near Donald and Douglas. "What happened?" he asked. "Yon Patrick bit off more than he could chew," replied Donald, annoyed. "I dinna fish, Henry," Douglas added. "Just go and get some help quickly now." Henry quickly puffed away to fetch the breakdown train. Duck soon arrived with the breakdown train, and the men got to work, separating Donald from the remains of the brake van. Later that evening, the Fat Controller spoke to Patrick. "You need to know your limits, Patrick," he said severely. "Things could have been really nasty." "Aye," Douglas put in angrily. "Now Donald's had to go to the works to be mended. Who's going to look after his trains now?" "I've arranged to borrow another engine from the other railway," the Fat Controller replied. A moment later, the horn of another diesel engine sounded out. A worried look crossed Duck's face as an ominously familiar black shape backed across the turntable. "Good evening," Diesel said as he backed down into the shed. The other engines exchanged angry looks. They knew this wasn't going to turn out well.